In many parts of the United States this week, you can see people carrying signs that say, "Make the sky blue again." The Florida governor spoke this week about legislation that will prevent governments from doing geoengineering in the state of Florida. A lot of people, he said, have crazy ideas about spraying things in the sky to fight climate change, and we don't want that in Florida. Florida's Surgeon General, the doctor in charge of health of the state, went even further than the governor. He implied that they were already long at work in geoengineering the state of Florida.
Meanwhile, Nicole Shanahan and Robert Kennedy Jr. just this week have stated that the Department of Health and Human Services, where Kennedy is in charge, have started an investigation into weather manipulation.
All of this has caused a flurry of publications and influencers to suddenly cover the story. Apparently, all the concern, including the concern that has caused states to pass legislation outlawing geoengineering, is crazy talk. The work of conspiracy theories. We just don't understand science. So, Patrick, what's new in the world of geoengineering?
Well, you touched on it, and I never thought that I would see this day where a government body was investigating geoengineering. And I'm not holding my breath. I think it's important not to have false hopes, but at the same time, we've got to recognize that this is big, and it also helps us with visibility. You know, Nicole Shanahan, who was Kennedy's vice presidential running mate during his campaign, she has become very outspoken about geoengineering just over the last week. And what it helps with is visibility.
Let's back up. Help us define our terms. So what's geoengineering?
Well, geoengineering is engineering the climate. It's weather modification. And we're very concerned because there's a lot of elements to geoengineering, including weather weapons. There's a long history of that, including proposals to geoengineer, to modify the climate as a way to fight climate change, and concerns about the fact that it's been ongoing.
How do you think our interview with Matt Landman went? Who is Matt Landman? What were the highlights of our interview? What stood out?
Yeah, so Matt Landman is an activist, and he produced the film Frankenskies. And one of the highlights for me was finding out that he had lived and worked in Humboldt County, California. Of course, I'm from Humboldt County. And he tells about his own experience watching climate manipulation from his work on a farm in Arcata. And he said they were expecting a big rainstorm to relieve them from the drought. And then suddenly all these jets just fly through, all these airplanes fly through, and they leave the chemicals, the tic-tac-toes, the boxes in the sky. And then suddenly there's no rain. And in the interview we did a few weeks ago, he explained that weather can be manipulated through high and low pressure, which corresponds to hot and cold. And he said it's manipulated through frequencies. And once they lay down a layer of chemicals, then they can hit it with microwaves. So I was very impressed by Matt Landman's scholarship and his knowledge of this issue. And I think that it's something that's, like he said, the most important issue for humanity, the most important thing facing humanity.
How did you become aware of this?
Well, I became aware of it around 2004 by listening to a radio program, Coast to Coast, and they had shows about weather manipulation. And at first I didn't believe it, but then I became aware of what it is. And there's some of it that's just undeniable, like the United States military's, their history of weather weapons, and something that's new now that wasn't there in 2004 when I started researching it is all these proposals that are on the table for geoengineering, where they tell you they like to do it.
And why is geoengineering so important, and why have you seen the need to focus on it for so many years?
Well, you know, it's this clandestine aerial fumigation. And is actually terrorism. It's eco-terrorism. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ongoing geoengineering patents. A patent for weather manipulation presented a problem for groups who wanted to take the weather into their own hands. So a group of globalists got together in 2017 under Warren Buffett, and they declared that they didn't have to follow patent laws because the patents on geoengineering, weather modification, were increasing at such an exponential rate. Patents on weather modification, they declared, could bypass normal patent law. The document that was a fruit of this meeting was called Exclusive Rights to Saving the Planet, a Patenting of Geoengineering Inventions. The paper is public record and is by Anthony E. Chavez. The self-proclaimed geoengineers go to describe a system of global governance and governance of the sun. That's what they say. They openly call it. And they say it could be dangerous. They're not going to look at any of the ethics or the impact on humans. And they claim that they had exclusive rights to saving the planet. And Matt Landman described this succinctly in one of the talks, and I wrote down what he said. He said, they say they have geoengineering inventions that do not have to face scrutiny, that do not have to face patent laws, that they want to launch and deploy full-scale deployment, launching and spraying everywhere on Earth all at once to save us from ourselves. They all came together in Chicago in 2017, calling themselves the Solar Geoengineering Governance Regime. The reasoning behind it, Matt went on to explain, was, quote, there's all these patents coming out and patent law can't keep up with all that are coming. And so they're going to sidestep patent law. And they call themselves a solar radiation governance regime. They are governing the sunlight, end of quote. And this is one of many, all the main science magazines over the last 8 or 9 years have ran stories saying that we need to do geoengineering to save us from the sun. The sun is the bad guy. And they're somehow not crazy for suggesting spraying the sky. And they describe a situation where they would attach spray mechanisms to the back of airplanes. So they're not crazy to suggest this. So all the science magazines, National Geographic, Smithsonian, including news agencies like the BBC and CNN, they run pro-geoengineering stories all the time. And what the main tool that they say they could use is retrofitting jets, sending fleets of jets up and spraying the sun. So they're not crazy to suggest this sort of thing. But if we point out that this is what we've been seeing since the mid-90s, somehow we're crazy. And that's also part of the psychological operations that are in play.
Tell us about the weather weapons and how this intersects with geoengineering.
Yeah, in fact, there's so many weather weapons, it's hard to know where to start. At the end of World War II, the United States had developed a tidal wave bomb, actually a special bomb that could create tidal waves. And during the Vietnam War, of course, the United States had Project Popeye, which was all about extending the monsoon season and flooding the trail, the Ho Chi Minh Trail that was used by the communists. And at the end of the Vietnam War, after that, all the countries in the world got together and they signed treaties banning weather weapons for use of war. But there was a caveat in those laws saying that you could experiment to do weather weapons on your own population. And there's a lot of different reasons why they might be doing this. We talked about that with Matt, how there's a geoengineering, genetically modified food agenda, that's part of it. You make a lot of money now over the global warming scam, carbon credits, grants, the reducing climate change is a billions of dollar industry, and it's all over the world. But weather weapons are a reality. In 1996, the United States Air Force they released a document called Owning the Weather by 2025, and weather as a force multiplier. And that was their goal. It was a plan to be owners of the weather by the year 2025, which is the year we're in now. And the crazy thing is that if you read the original documents from the military, they're very open about their desire to control the weather. In fact, even President Lyndon Johnson, he said that he wanted to have a weather satellite to control the cloud layer, and whoever controls the weather controls the world. So I think there's a lot of evidence that the Manhattan Project, the project to make the nuclear bomb, it became a weather manipulation project.
And climate change, how does this tie into global warming?
Well, the climate's changing, but it's changing because it's being manipulated. So this is actually one of the things that the left throughout the world is very attached to. They're very attached to this narrative of climate change. And I know because I hear it from my students, there's just this belief in climate change. And with this critique of geoengineering like I'm doing, we're saying that, okay, yes, the climate's changing, but it's changing because it's being manipulated. So, every time there's forest fires in California, or hurricanes, earthquakes, is blamed on climate change, and we're told that governments aren't doing enough to combat climate change, but they only look at carbon emissions, which is just silly. We can't say with certainty that global warming is a fact when they've been manipulating the climate since it began. And I can't underestimate just how much the fake clouds in the United States and Canada and Europe do manipulate the climate, because they're blocking out the sun. There's a lot of objectives to this. Part of it is to be able to control what crops go, to be able to administer the sun, solar radiation management. But it started in the 90s, and then the whole kind of alarm about global warming grew up around this. And they've got it now to the point, if ever they stop the clandestine fumigation of our skies, the temperature would increase because we'd have the sun, and then they would use that for more calling for overt geoengineering, because you've got the young people today so worried about global warming, and they believe it's such an existential threat to humanity that they're literally willing to accept anything. And so it's a big psychological operation. And one of the things that I've proposed is all this talk now about geoengineering, and we've got to do this to save the planet. It's really a way so that the United States government can use their weather weapons and do it under the disguise of geoengineering. Now, Kennedy, he wants to stop this and wants to investigate it, and that's one of the things that's come out in the last week. But in some ways, I think Donald Trump is very naive, and he doesn't realize the extent of the corruption. And questions like geoengineering, who's doing the spraying, why are they doing the spraying, it also raises profound questions about who is really in control of the United States government.
Yeah.
Is it the president, or is it criminal elements within the CIA, or is it the military? And yeah, Robert Kennedy Jr. and Nicole Shanahan, God bless them, but we need more. We need more than just, but we'll have to wait and see, and it never hurts to hope.
What do debunkers tell you?
Actually, I read a lot of debunking articles. Anytime CNN or The Guardian or the New York Times does a story about chemtrails or geoengineering, I will read it. And also, of course, I have people writing to me. So the debate is about what these lines that we're seeing in the sky that fan out and cause the cloud cover, whether these are contrails or chemtrails. And the debunkers will say that, no, these are just condensation trails from normal jet aircraft. There's nothing normal about it, Holly. We never saw this when I was a kid. I grew up in the 80s. We had blue skies. You see jets, and the trails would dissipate after minutes or so. And they have an answer. They say, well, it's because there's more aircraft now, or they say that it's because we're noticing it more, because we're brainwashed. And a lot of the times, I'm trying to deal with this politically because I already accept that this is going on. I don't think that any more research has to be done. We need political solutions, but oftentimes they'll try to force me into much more academic way of speaking than I like and accuse me of. There's a lot of personal attacks that I get, but the government is fumigating our cities. It's happening in Germany. It's happening in Spain. It's happening wherever there are U.S. military bases, and it's very alarming because it's fumigation, and that's why we share the photos of the fake clouds.
Yeah, exactly. What can people do to help make others become aware of this issue?
Well, by sharing the reports, by themselves becoming educated about this. And, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's really true, because when I show people these pictures, then they see, well, there is something going on. So I lived in Humboldt County in 2016, 2017 before coming back to Ecuador. And I would point out to the lines in the sky, even though Humboldt County is so rural, it's not near any big airport. And so you wouldn't expect airplanes to be doing loops and zigzags and circles in the sky all day long. And so we know that's military because it doesn't have the signature of commercial flights. So I would point this out to people. They say, oh, no, those are just condensation trails. But then once those lines in the sky would open and leave a sheet of white, then those same people, if I point out, look at the skies, they say, no, they're just clouds. So they're not focused on looking at the sky enough to really be able to interpret what they see. So a lot of times the debunkers, they won't acknowledge the fact that once these trails, contrails, whatever you want to call them, chemtrails, when they fan out, they do affect weather patterns. And I would see in Eureka, California in May, beautiful blue sky, not a cloud in the sky, and then the airplanes would come and start spraying, and then by 5 o'clock, the sky had been completely covered, but then there's a mist that comes down in the evening, but you never know, is that a real mist or is this the poison gases that are coming down on you? It's very frightening. Yeah, probably the best thing people can do is watch the documentary Frankenskies, and there's also the film The Dimming, put out by Dane Wigington, Geoengineering Watch.org, and Dane Wigington is from Northern California. I know him. He's a great guy. He's actually been doing lab tests since he started noticing this, testing the water and testing the soil to see if there's aluminum nanoparticles in them. So one of the things that the debunkers will tell you is that these lab tests that are turning up with exponential amounts of aluminum metals in the soil and the water, that this is just natural aluminum that is in nature as a mineral. And it's true, aluminum is a mineral and you can't find it in nature, but it's always bound to other elements. You never find aluminum in free form. And one of the reasons that aluminum is so damaging to nature when it's in free form is because nature doesn't recognize it. And that's one of the reasons that the soils and why there's so many forest fires now and they're burning hotter. It's because the aluminum and the barium that they spray, it's a fire accelerant. And so this is a planetary emergency. It's ecoterrorism, and I'm not even at the point anymore where I'm asking, is this happening? I'm saying it's happening, and then so I want to deal politically with what this means, and it's very shocking.
Before we wrap up, tell us about the weird world of sea spray.
Well, when I was taking the bus from Eureka to Folsom, California, right before flying back to Ecuador, I was listening to this program on NPR about sea spray, and she compared it to sunscreen for the sky. There's a full media campaign about this.
I'll bet you were thinking you were getting out while you still could.
Yeah. And now the New York Times released this weird black and white Twilight Zone-like photo of a geoengineering proposal for ships to do sea spray. A proposal that is on the table in many places to combat global warming is to spray aerosols from the of ships and from the tops of ships. Ocean cloud generators, or ship tracks, is what they call them in favorable documents. They also refer to sea spray. Now they don't even try to claim that it's ship fuel or anything. I kid you not. Ship spray will be aerosols that are sprayed into the atmosphere from the backs of ships to reflect sunlight and cool the planet. And the shift from discussing geoengineering in speculative terms to proposing concrete applications such as ship-based aerosol spraying indicates a significant normalization of climate intervention strategies in mainstream discourse, while the use of euphemisms like cloud brightening or sunlight administration raises questions about transparency and public consent in these climate policies. And it's really ironic, Kholy, because ships have had to be retrofitted and pay millions and millions of dollars to bring them up to these green standards. And I really question if this idea of sea spray is actually really counterproductive. Like it wasn't enough spraying from airplanes. Now they want to get ships in on the action. Well, guys, that's all for today. Thanks for listening. And remember, we don't know you're a listener until we hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment and letting us know how you stay in touch with the show.
Question more. Keep thinking. Stay active.